Hi, I'm Sue Lotus, the person that you'll be hearing in this interview, but not seeing. So, the person who is being interviewed is Reverend Jessica Sharp. She's incredible and just a wealth of knowledge. In every single conversation with her, I learn so much. I'll read you her bio from her website. Reverend Jessica Sharp is a spiritual practitioner dedicated to helping individuals achieve optimal well being. She is a minister of the Church of Natural Grace, a psychic healing church and school, and has been facilitating sound healing since 2018. She is also an entrepreneur, artist, and clown. I'll include her website in the description. So the interview starts sort of in the middle of a conversation about AAPA, which stands for Asian Americans for Psychedelic Advocacy. It is an organization that Reverend Jessica started in order to amplify the voices of Asian Americans and Asians in the psychedelic space. So more info on that in the description as well. And then lastly, before the video begins, I want to apologize in advance for how many times I say the word like in this interview. I was actually really nervous about this because it was my first interview ever, and it was with someone who's just really wise and cool. So a heads up, I say the word like a lot and couldn't edit it out completely. So I am sorry. I'm going to be mindful of this moving forward. Okay, I think that about covers it all. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. What inspired you to start this?
So what inspired me to start this is that I have been getting really active in more underground communities of Asians in psychedelics, both people who are practitioners and providers, and also folks who are just interested and curious.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of communities of us, people gathering, but I haven't seen people actually organizing to cohesively speak out. And as I've gone to different conferences, it's just very clear to me that there are not Asian people on stages. There's not Asian people being represented. There's also not necessarily Asian people who are there. And that's, Asians make 60% of the population on Earth. Like, that's actually like a pretty glaring, thing to me. But
why do you think that is? Like, there's so many of us, and yet we're so underrepresented in this space, in the psychedelic space.
Yeah, so we are underrepresented because the U.S. war on drugs is still ravaging Asia. So what happened is, basically, if you look at the drug laws in the United States, it actually started happening in the 40s and 50s when after the Civil War, and Black communities specifically, started to gain access to resources and land, and they started to build more culturally inviting spaces. And what ended up happening is these jazz clubs started popping up in the global South, and the jazz clubs, the white people and Black people were integrating. And it was very common for them to have cannabis there. And so there were a group of men who, maybe I'm forgetting his name wrong, but Herman Hess. And they basically realized that they wanted to keep segregation. And, they didn't want Black people and white people partying together because that was like really bad for them. So they created the drug scheduling system, which basically made cannabis and other substances where people are more open and loving and kind with each other. They made them illegal. And we know that this didn't force the substances to go away. It's actually proven that white communities use substances just as much as other communities. But what has happened instead is mass incarceration, specifically for the Black communities and communities of color, using this scheduled system, which is exactly what the system was designed for. The system was specifically designed in order to be able to control and incarcerate people of color communities. And so that system of scheduling the drugs that way was then taken to the United Nations, and America basically forced the adoption of it at the United Nations level. So every country who has wanted to join the United Nations had to agree to our scheduled substances framework.
Wow.
And in Asia, the longest history of cannabis use, the oldest found burial sites and things of cannabis are there. This also includes Japan, it includes China. If you go to India, if you go to Bhutan, there is cannabis plants growing wild in the mountains. You know, it's the Chinese Bible of medicine, which has existed for thousands of years, has listed cannabis for all the things that Western medicine is now proving it can function for or help with. But if you look at after China joined the UN and was became imperialized to its own degree by the United States, now you can't find that information anywhere. So once these Asian countries joined the UN and had to fall under these same strict drug laws, all of the information about it went completely erased. Any medicine practitioner who used these substances obviously got rid of them, discarded them. There's no evidence. There's very small evidence in small places, but it's very hard to find. And also because Asians are collectivist societies, our identity is really based on the collective. We don't really have individual identities.
Right.
We have an identity as part of a collective. And
as like a tribe.
Yes. So once the rules are set for the collective, individuals don't step outside of that.
Right.
So even though there are Asian countries that have very strict laws and there are citizens here in the United States who have access to psychedelics, who have access to these medicines, a lot of them are so stigmatized because their families would not agree. And for some, even, to get sort of like caught or associated anyway could prevent them from going back to their home countries. Or it could also put their family members in those countries at risk for government persecution. So that's why, go to these psychedelic conferences and there are no Asian people there because the risk is so vastly still disproportionate for our communities than it is for other communities. Yeah.
Do you know if there were any repercussions from the UN, for example, like when they... what would happen if they got caught, for instance? Right. Was there anything like that? Were there any repercussions?
There are. So the way that it works is like the policy framework is provided by the UN. The UN doesn't do any sort of like policing. Oh. So it's all the individual countries that make their own laws. Yeah. So in and this is on the sheet. I shouldn't be specific. So like in Singapore, if you had cannabis, it could have up until I think in Malaysia, up until 2023, it was a mandatory hanging.
What?
Yes.
I'm like, what? Yes. Am I reading that right?
Yes, that's correct.
What?
The Philippines has a long history of just killing hundreds, thousands of people for suspected use of controlled substances. South Korea's mandatory drug testing, 5 years in prison if they're caught. Japan, same thing, huge fees, 5 years in prison. Indonesia, possession of cannabis could land you a life imprisoned or even death.
Oh my gosh.
China still also execution and long sentences. Thailand, the same thing, although cannabis has been decriminalized. Other substances that fall under our scheduled system are still heavily policed. So it's the local governments, but it's also important to recognize that these local governments are to some degree puppeted by American imperialism. Like when America dropped a bomb on Japan, they installed their own government in Japan. And they also, because Japan had annexed Korea, which is a very gentle word for actually what they did, the United States also is in charge of Korea. So, so much of Korea's political problems has been because the leaders of Korea do not represent Korea. They represent the interests of America and executing the interests of America and using force and violence in order to maintain that system of control. Wow. And so these drug laws are an extension of that. And so there's just a high price for Asians to participate in this. And these medicines come from our land, have the longest usage of our lands. Right. Buddhism, as it spread through Asia integrated into the different indigenous rituals that were more earth-based. So also when you find different Buddhist lineages all over Asia, they also have different rituals and practices, because it was sort of like the theories of Buddhism spread, but the rituals often stayed tied to the animistic folklore rituals that were local there.
Right.
And often they did use mushrooms. They did consume mind-altering substances. If we look at the Korean indigenous shamanic lineage, which is a matriarchal lineage, it's not very documented very widely, because again, there's a huge risk for that, and there's also an erasure of that's happened. But the shamans would take mushrooms and and even just drink alcohol. Their thing is about using these medicines and these tools to connect with the earth, to connect with the spirits, and to get guidance from them and to get attuned with them. And so it is really disturbing to see in this psychedelic renaissance all this like psychedelic Buddhism stuff, and it's like all white people from the West, and it's like there's actually many more Buddhist people in the East who actually would have some interesting things to say about the practice of using mind-altering substances as it relates to, connecting with spirit. But again, our voice is not really there, and I feel like I'm in a very unique position as a Korean American, because I was raised here. My mother moved her siblings over at a young age. So I don't have active family still in Korea, South Korea. So I feel a lot of permission to speak out, because I don't feel like I'm putting my family members at risk, because they're here in the United States. And I started a cannabis business about 6 years ago. And that's when it became really clear to me of like, oh my goodness, like this plant is very much part of my ancestral bloodline, and I am here using it with access to it in its quality and its honored form. And in Asia, they don't necessarily have that, or it's just heavily stigmatized. And I feel a responsibility to share about it and talk about it, because our ancestors have been using these medicines for a long time. And the biggest problem I have with the psychedelic renaissance is even in the naming, you can see that it's, like I was saying, it's built on top of Western medicine, which is American patriarchal medicine, which centers substances. You
were saying,
Yes. And there are no other healing traditions in the world that center substances. It is really only American Western medicine. And my father is a psychiatrist, child psychiatrist and pediatrician. So I was actually raised in Western medicine. I learned a lot about Western medicine. I studied it in college. I studied a lot of pharmacology. And there is this heavily pertinent belief, because of this strong attachment to materialism, that it's the substances that unlock the abilities in the body. And in pretty much every other medicinal or healing tradition, there is an acknowledgement of spirit. There is acknowledgement of the unseen. There's acknowledgement in Eastern traditions and medicine. They're looking at the energy of something, not the physical manifestation of it. And so their focus is not on the substance. Their focus is on the person's energetic dissonance with their life experience, with their environment, right? And they may use substances as part of their toolkit for addressing that, but that's not what's centered.
Right.
And so it's also disconcerting to me in the psychedelic renaissance, where people are like, well, where's the Asians? Why aren't these people, aren't those people involved? And it's like, why don't we see these traditions in there? And it's like, because it's a totally different paradigm than these exist in. In Eastern tradition, we are centered on spirit. We are working to connect with energy. We're working to connect with,
our ancestors,
our intuitive information, right? Not that which is beyond the material. And Western medicine will not acknowledge that which is beyond the material. And so how can you say, well, this fits into this paradigm, when you're not even like looking at and centering the same thing, which is actually ultimately the person's, alignment with like what is harmonious, chi, like energy. So I think that's the other thing that's problematic of like, why are Asians not here, and why does it seem like it doesn't fit? Because it doesn't fit, because it's centered on the substance. And then that also creates a lot of the problems that I see in the psychedelic space, where people think, oh, if I just take this substance, I'm going to be cured, I'm going to be fixed. And that's just not true. Like,
super harmful too.
It's very harmful. There's also this really, in the Western mindset, also when it comes to this idea of like spirituality and religion, there's this program of like this like peak state happiness as like, oh, if you're healthy and you're connected to God, then you're always going to have this like jubilant, happy, overflowing nature, and like you know what I'm saying? And but like in the East, people are like, that's that's not a thing. Right? We don't hold in high regard this like state of like, bliss, like happiness,
like enlightenment.
No, there isn't. Like there's more of a recognition that like we're in a human experience and we're gonna have a range. Sometimes we're gonna feel elated and excited. But sometimes we're gonna feel sad and tired. And in this like Western mindset, there's this like ideal of like this like perpetual state of bliss. And this is just like true about Mormons. Like, and as somebody who was raised in the Mormons, like there is this like idealistic view that if you're godlike and if you're healthy and you're happy, you're just like, jubilant all the time. And that doesn't exist in the East. Like that's not real. But I think this like obsession with like jubilance as an enlightened and spiritual state gets sucked in, like people in the psychedelic renaissance, because then they take these substances and then they feel that and they get that peak state, and then they're like, oh, I'm healed, I'm God, everything's great, I'm happy. And then it wears off and they go back down to having to deal with the things that feel hard and difficult, and they don't have the tools. They only have tools that make them feel happy. They don't have tools to deal with the other states of being human. And so then they're like, oh no, something's wrong. I just need to keep chasing that feeling. And that's really unhealthy. So like if you also look at like Eastern traditions, they're not just, they will use tools and substances to help you explore different aspects of jubilance and connection. But there's also tools and rituals to sit with like the whole breadth of life, which includes grief, which includes sadness, which includes anger, right? That's like another thing, like sacred rage, sacred wrath. Like we have deities who are wrathful in the East. And we pray to them and we celebrate them. And like, there's no such thing of that in Western culture. Like, that's the devil. That's like demons.
Shh, go put that over there.
Exactly. And so I think that it's also how I see that playing out in the psychedelic renaissance is it's like, they're continuing sort of these same patterns, which are disconnected from a sense of humanity, which are disconnected from a sense of like presence and harmonious living of like the full spectrum of what life is and what life has to offer. And I think people get so caught up in that. And then it's like you're constantly chasing this high peak state and thinking that that's the answer to everything in life, when actually that's an addiction and it's keeping you from actually experiencing life. Because if you want to experience life, you have to experience the whole breadth of it.
Exactly.
Not just like these peak jubilant states.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what happens when we center a substance.
Yes, right, exactly.
It's like this like fucked up like side effect of like centering something outside of us.
Yes, and it's also centering and giving that all of the power.
Yes, right. And disempowering our intuition, our hearts, right? Who we are, our souls, our spirits.
Which is not to say that doesn't mean we shouldn't use them or shouldn't access them. But it is to say, like I was saying, it's like the paradigm of understanding needs to be on like what's alive and real for me? What's the right thing for me? And is this the right tool for me to use based on where I'm at and where I'm seeking to go? And that is all nestled in my relationship with spirit, with that which is beyond the materialist materialistic world.
Yep, exactly. Wow. Now this is what do you think is like the solution then? Like, how can we bridge that gap? Like, earlier we were asking like, where are the Asian people? Like, how is the answer to have more Asian people show up at these conferences and events? Is that the answer? Is that the solution?
So I think the answer is the solution. The answer and the solution is something that I also am aiming, I practice myself. And that's what I think it is I think it's for us to we need to create our own communities of diaspora that are inclusive, that center on our communication with our ancestors in the unknown, and that help us connect with our humanity together. And not center the substance, but center the well-being of ourselves and the community. And recognize that these are the tools that help us with that, but they are not the end-all be-all, and that it's actually our relationship with each other. Another huge disservice that American global culture has oppressed on other people is also this idea of like Darwinism and survival of the fittest, when actually science, anthropology, and history show us that it's actually survival of the collaborators. Like, it's not survival of the fittest.
Whoa.
The people who have survived, the energies, the beings that have survived are the ones who collaborate the best with others. The ones who thrive are the collaborators. It's not it's not. And that's like this mental construct that's not real, but so many people believe it, especially in Korean culture. There's so much competition. But actually, that's why people are alone. That's why people are disconnected. This is why people don't have community. They don't have trust. They don't feel like they connect with others. It's because they believe that their survival is about being on top in this hierarchical structure, and that's just not true.
Wow.
So we need to become better collaborators and share a ritual together and share practices together and practice listening to that which is beyond together. So I have a Korean American women and non-binary group. We meet regularly where we do rituals, we sing together, we make food together, we make kimchi together, food, music, dancing. We need to get together and food, music, dance.
Yes.
And also we also have to address and work through stuff. Like cancel culture, like, oh, you pissed me off, you can't come anymore. That's also
a boundary.
That is toxic patriarchy. Matriarchies don't do that.
Yeah.
If you look at the way that matriarchies function, they don't do that. Restorative justice is actually a return to how can we stay as a community where we don't kick people out, but we also cannot allow people to commit harm. Yeah. We have to hold people accountable for the harm that they've created. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face as like community builders and as collaborators, because we haven't, in a globalized society where people can just go off, just walk away and there's no accountability. We need to find a way within our communities to be able to build trust and to hold others accountable so that we can maintain and create containers that are actually what our souls and our human bodies are yearning for. Because our ancestors had that. Yeah. But that was geography based and it was survival based. And now we're in this totally different globalized economy and there's more understanding sometimes too in different ways, but we need to be coming together and dancing together and singing together and maybe taking some substance in a healthy and harm reduced way. But then also, being honest about, addictions and coping mechanisms, which may come in the form of substances, but also can come in the form of other things too. Yeah. And I think that's what it's going to take. And I think that's like what the centering is. And so the Chikuna conference, what I really love is they center Indigenous voices of the global South. Yes. And biggest thing that, struck me from the talks last year from these women from Brazil, and they're, she was saying, like, I live in a community. I've been apprenticing under shamans for, over a decade.
Yeah.
I've been practicing for that long. I'm still not allowed to have the title shaman. I will still need to continue. I'm still under their purview. And then when I am granted that, and while I'm working through it, I am a keeper of my community. My job is to make sure I'm supporting my community and I'm taking care of them and they're taking care of me. She's like, that's what it means to be a shaman to her, right?
Wow.
And here, people think, oh, shaman means that I can give you a bunch of drugs and I can take a bunch of drugs and then we'll have a good time. We'll blast off to outer space together and you'll feel this love and suddenly you'll attribute that to me and now we're friends. But like, that's the most flimsy kind, of connection, because there's no depth. Where's the trust? Where's the understanding? Where's the, it's actually working through repair, working through misunderstandings, working through conflict that we actually build true trust and connection. And that hasn't been happening in our communities. So yeah, I host almost monthly potlucks, Asian potlucks. And, we did a Lunar New Year, we did an Asian month celebration. On Lunar Year, we made little snakes and we had an ancestor altar and we wrote notes to our ancestors and we sang together.
Wow.
And this is like my way of saying, like, I think this is a solution, right? This is a solution that we need. And I have a friend friends who are Indian, and Diwali was coming up and I was like, let's make our own Diwali celebration. Yeah. And we did. And, a lot of them said, like, when I left my culture, I didn't celebrate these things anymore because I've associated it with, that tradition. And I'm not part of that necessarily anymore because I'm like in this alternative or this like emerging culture. And so reclaiming, it's important for us to like reclaim, what our ancestors have done. Like there is so much beauty in the ritual and, it's common for human groups to celebrate New Year's, to celebrate the light, to celebrate harvest, to celebrate the moon and the planetary shifts. Like all human groups have done this. Like all our ancestors did this in different ways. And it's on us to figure out our own way of reclaiming that. So I think it takes for us to view not just like, okay, this substance is a really powerful tool in my toolkit. It's like, if you're a chef and you get a new knife set and you got really sharp knives, that's fantastic. But more important than the knives are, what are you cooking with it? And
who is the chef?
And who's the chef? And what is it doing? And also, I think, how are you holding your own self in this work? And I think that's also another huge gap that I see in this. And there are traditional structures, there are societal structures that can be used by, like we were saying, there's great programs out there. I don't want to make them seem like they're not great, like CIAS and there's some other things. There's licensures and therapies and all these things. And those frameworks are built on and anchored in white supremacy. They just are. The Western medicine system, all systems in all institutional systems in the United States are deeply anchored in and white supremacy and are keen on continuing them. They're not designed to support people of color communities. They are not designed for oppressed peoples to be able to pull themselves out by the bootstraps. That's just not true. It's just not true. And I think that it's important for us and people of color communities to see that and to honor and to recognize it. And there's a lot that we can learn from Black communities as well, and learn from each other of then how do we empower ourselves individually and as a community to operate in these systems that are not designed for us, that do not have our best interest at heart. For me, that has been, I've pursued a more spiritual path and became a minister and started a church. And I think that the church structure is a really great avenue for a lot of people of color people of color who want to practice their indigenous medicines. But it's important to understand that framework because it does too also exist inside of American white male patriarchy. And so it is important to understand the risks and what is available to you, which is based on your geography. And so there's That's something I'm always happy to talk to people about, is to help them understand those nuances and differences. For some people, it may make sense for them to try to get accredited and to operate in certain places as accredited licenses. And for some people, it may make more sense to them to pursue the spiritual accreditation for their spiritual work and to pursue that path. And I think that we need to just get creative and open ourselves up, because there's many different ways that we can go about supporting our communities. And if we know and understand the systems and how resources move, and how also enforcement happens, because that's actually a big part of it between the federal and the state and the local governments, then we can operate in a way where we can maximize the resources that are available to us, while also applying the best tools that are going to support us and our community.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of people don't know. And they also were so brainwashed to think that the accreditation systems that exist out there, especially within academia, are the ways that we need to go to be validated, when actually that is not necessarily true, and especially not necessarily true when it comes to spiritually anchored work.
That's so true, because that piece seems to be what's the core element that seems to be missing actually from these Western institutions, right?
Yes.
The spiritual aspect is missing.
Yes.
Everywhere I look.
Everywhere.
It's not there. And I'm like, where is it? This is what I'm looking for. It's not here. So I feel like I'm just constantly like looking for it. And I'm like, oh, maybe this one, maybe this. And then I get in, and because they say that they do, right? They say they might be really convincing in that, saying that, oh, we really center Indigenous wisdom and knowledge. And it's like, but then I don't feel like I got that piece. I don't feel like I got the spiritual piece. I don't feel like I connected with my spirit or any spirit,
Yes.
Yeah.
The denial of spirit is deeply part of the colonization and imperialistic framework. And it is the elephant in the room that can be unnamed. Because it is how our Indigenous peoples were stripped of their power.
Yeah.
Right. And just like we were saying with the matriarchal, with the Mudang in Korea, why are they so powerful? Because they are communicating with the spirits.
Yeah.
Why were they made a slave class? Why are they continuously stripped of their power by society in patriarchal frameworks? Because speaking to spirits is powerful.
Yeah.
Because it is a power.
Yes.
Right. And so society has continuously stripped, this patriarchy has continuously stripped us. It wasn't just in the United States in the Salem witch trials that women who used their intuitive abilities were killed. It also happened in Asia. It also happened in Europe. It was a global phenomena for women to be killed for using their intuitive powers. Wow. And that had, it happened all over the earth. And that lives in us deeply, especially as women. And actually in my going through my own healing work, many times I have had to work through a lot of epigenetic trauma. Like I said, that my mother, who was clairvoyant, encouraged me at a young age to understand my clairvoyance, but she also made it very clear I was never to talk about it with anybody else. Nobody could ever know that I was doing this. And that's for good reason. For thousands of years, women have been killed and subjugated to violence for using that power. So it's no wonder that a woman I feel like there's this thing missing, and there is maybe an opportunity to connect with, but I feel terrified to do that. There's this, it brings in me this deep fear that I might be killed, that I may be ostracized. That's because our mothers, our grandparents, our grandmothers, their grandmothers, did see that, did watch that with their eyes. And that was put into our DNA, and we still have that in our DNA.
Wow.
And so that's why it's not just it can't just be an intellectual process. And I've come to realize this in my own healing work with my grandmother. And I have had these areas in my body that have felt numb to me. And I just didn't understand, especially in my womb space. And it wasn't until I was in ceremony with my grandmother that she showed me the abuse that she went through after she married my grandfather. In Korea, the woman moves into the in-laws house and becomes their domestic servant, their domestic slave. Yeah. And I just saw so many visions and memories of her being assaulted, being sexually assaulted, being, being degraded. And what was interesting is when I was able to witness that, I was able to see how that impacted her body and how I was carrying that in my body, and how I didn't understand why I was carrying such numbness, such pain in my body, when I myself had not experienced something that I could chalk up to that level of violence, So that's when I started to really understand how epigenetic trauma carries, that it's in our DNA, that information is in there. And because of the denial of our connection to our ancestors and up to the spirit world, people think, oh, it's in my mind, or I'm mentally ill, or I need to not be connected with my body, or it needs to be solved with medications. And I think it's a big disservice to us. And I do appreciate that plant medicines and the psychedelic work does bring us back of like, oh, there's something beyond the materialistic world. And when I connect with it, when I listen to it, when I explore it, it opens up something inside of me in my life that I now have access to that I didn't before.
Wow. I have a question I want to ask you about that. You mentioned epigenetics and how it kind of lives on in us, because I think how we were in our, when my mother was born, I was already, because women are born with all of their eggs, right? And so when my mother was born, I was already a part of her. And when my grandmother was born, my mother was already a part of my grandmother. So that lineage epigenetics just makes sense I think it just makes sense because it does, it's science. How can women especially, or I guess I should be asking you, how did you heal that numbness that you were talking about in your body that it turns out it was from your grandmother?
Yeah, I'm still am. I'm going to say that. I'm just going to also say that a lot of these traumas, a lot of these things are also lifelong unfoldings.
Oh yeah. I feel that.
I think that's I think that's really important to say, because, even in psychic school, when I teach people how to clean out their energy and clean out the limiting beliefs, it's like, they'll still pop up in the future in some way, right? Like these things are still imprinted on us. It's not that they also ever truly go away. Yeah. It's that they don't have the ability to sway our reactions and our attention as we clear them.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'd say I still am today. I'd say the first thing was, though, actually, I made a cannabis oil and I put it on my body and inside my body because I knew that I could with coconut oil and cannabis. And I suddenly felt my body for the first time. And then I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to have sensation in that part of my body. And I didn't even realize that I didn't know what sensation in that part of my body felt like. So cannabis is a very special plant for me. It's, a plant that I have worked with, and applying it topically allows it to absorb into the skin and into the muscles, but not past the blood-brain barrier. So it's very medicinal. I think most people have used it actually primarily as a skin. And when you go to the East, and people who still use it typically, use it for arthritis and pain and stuff. It is applied topically. So the cannabis oil, I realized, I was like, oh wow, I have sensation. And then that started my journey of like, wow, why don't I have sensation in this part of my body? What's going on? And I did a ceremony, and that's when my grandmother came to me in the ceremony, and she showed me all these memories of her getting abused. And then I was like, okay, it was really interesting because it was like perfectly the same. It was like where I saw damage or harm being done to her was exactly where I felt it in my own body. And so I was like, okay, I'm clearly carrying this of hers. And I've worked to clear it psychically. I've worked to clear it in ceremony. I have to still renegotiate my relationship with her all the time because I love her and she's around and she's very opinionated. I love you, honey. I love you, honey. And so it's a constant renegotiation with her, but it has been to me. And then embodiment practices. So realizing that also I'm not in my body. I haven't been in my body in a long time. So a lot of my work as psychic crisis has been about just like, am I in my body right now? Or like, am I fully in my body? Or like, maybe I'm kind of only into my body up to here, but like, am I like all the way into my body and like present in it? And, you know, as I've been doing that and through the meditation work, that then a lot comes up. You know, there's a lot of fear and terror, a lot of patriarchal programming. I'm not safe, or I need a man to be safe, or to disregard my body's needs in order to serve others for my own survival. And so then as I've gotten more into my body and allowed myself to connect with more sensation, I've then had to deal with other things as well. And that's why I'd say it's still an ongoing process, but it does get a little bit easier over time.
Okay. That's encouraging.
Yeah,
it really is.
And I do ancestral healing ceremonies here in my home, and
it's a beautiful home.
I have folks come, and at the beginning of the ceremony, we create an energetic container that for our ancestors who are here to support us in a beneficent way. Because some ancestors are angry and not helpful. It's good to have boundaries with them. But the ones that are helping us, like we invite into the room and we do a journey with them, led through sound. And what I have experienced and seen from that has been really impactful. So most people think of their ancestors as just their grandparents or their great grandparents. But what I've seen is the ancestors that come through in these ceremonies can often be so long ago that there's no way you could know their names or their stories. They don't even speak a language that you could understand, right?
Right.
But I see how they are around the people in their day-to-day life. And, you know, like I remember one ancestor I was telling this woman that he wanted to say to her how he liked pickles. And so it was like every time she craved pickles, it was like he was there and it was like his energetic influence. And, you know, he was from a very long time ago. And yeah, there was one woman who came through a ceremony and she had a whole group of women around her. Oh. And one thing that I do is I ask the ancestors, I pull up a picture, you know, in my mind, I pull up a picture of the earth and I say, where on the earth did you live? And they showed me, and like, I can't even describe how the landmass looked and like what it became, because it was like, you know, the Pangea, like, you know, the idea that like there was actually like, it was a totally different land formation. And I was like, well, where is this? And they're like, it would be somewhere between Japan and Australia right now. But it was like a full landmass. And I was like, oh, this is like crazy. Wow. So clearly these ancestors were old, like tens of thousands of years, you know, maybe even, I don't know, 100,000 years old, like so old. But they sat around her in a circle and they were like giggling and gossiping. And it was like they were always with her. And in fact, I could tell sometimes she would get like overwhelmed and distracted because they had a lot of opinions about people in her life. And so they were always kind of like, you can trust them, you can't trust them, you can trust them, you can't trust them. And there was a whole interesting backstory about this karmic relationship about them being with her. And it had to do with this group of female ancestors. They lived on this island and it was like very fruitful and wonderful. And then these men came in and convinced them to come somewhere else, thinking that paradise was somewhere else, making them believe that there was a paradise somewhere else they were taking them to. And then these men took them and ended up imprisoning them and just treating them like animals and slaves. And so these ancestors were like very adamant to her of like, don't trust, you know, if somebody says there's paradise somewhere else, don't trust them. Like, you know what the right answer is for you. Like, you know, also this idea that like, when you have it good, allow yourself to see that you have it good. Like if somebody comes in and says it could be better somewhere else, like, don't just take that don't just like take that at face value. Like that's probably not true, actually. It's actually probably not true.
It's probably a lie.
Yeah. So that's why these ancestors were with her. They were like very predominant in her field. And so I get to, so what I see is that the ancestors who are very active, especially in our day-to-day life, in our life, it typically has some sort of karmic tie to something that we're working through. And, you know, they experience some aspect of it and they're here trying to help us like complete it in a way.
Wow. Is it like you were saying, because I was reading, oh my gosh, Daniel Floor. Because people have like kept bringing his name up in his books on like ancestors and communicating with them. But actually the reason I brought him up because I started reading his book, didn't finish the book, but like ancestors, I'm learning more about them. And so I started doing Chizha. Is that something that you would recommend somebody to do on like a weekly basis if they are of Korean ancestry?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, my biggest thing to say is to quiet yourself and if you have a ritual that you like, that you feel familiar with, then use it. And if you don't, ask them, because they're available for us to communicate with all the time. But we also typically need to get into a ritual or into a space of quietness. And then we also need to ask and then be available to listen.
Got it.
And so some people still feel a connection to ritual from their heritage. And I encourage them to use it. And if many people don't, like, especially if you're like an adoptee, it could feel disingenuous for you. But there's still a way that you could, you know, sit, like making an altar is like the basic thing. And then sitting at the altar and asking and making yourself available to listen. And even asking them, how do you want me to communicate with you? What's the ritual? And for me, I asked, and my ancestor said, make kimchi. And so so then I got together with my mom, made kimchi, and I get together with my Korean American friends. And then I feel their presence when we're together, you know, and they're happy and they rejoice. And I am able, like, it's like a whole party. It's a whole celebration.
Yeah.
And so, we're trained to believe that we have 5 senses, but we have many more. You know, our intuitive, we have many intuitive centers, actually. We have clairvoyance, which is the ability to see. We have clairaudience, which is the ability to hear spirits. Clairsentience, which is the ability to feel through, you know, energetic waves, like what other people are experiencing, or to feel the emotions of others. And so there are, like, we have also intuitive centers for that information to flow through. And everyone has them, just like everyone has, you know, the ability to smell, eat, and taste. Like, if you also have the ability to, through psychics and clairaudience and clairsentience. But most people, because we're in such a materialistic based world, most people don't use them or don't use them consciously because we've been taught or told that they're not real. But that's, again, that like has to do with like the removal of spirit and the disconnection of that and the oppression of that form of power, especially for women. And so I really just encourage people to, you have to create the time and the space, create a physical space, create a time, and also recognize that you have the ability to, everyone has the ability to communicate. We are hardwired as humans to be able to communicate with our ancestors. Like just as much as we are to communicate with each other.
Right. Wow. So really just like the most basic thing that everyone just needs to do is just make space for it and sit and listen and with the intention to communicate with the ancestors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, sometimes they feel afraid because they're worried that they're going to call on the angry ancestors.
I was just wondering.
And it comes up a lot. Part of the sitting and making space is also about making sacred space and boundaried space and being intentional with what you're asking for and being bound, you know, like I said, like when I do the ceremonies, we create a container and we're very clear about who we're calling in and who we're not allowing in. And so that's part of it too.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like when you would go to a party, if somebody is belligerent, somebody's crazy, you don't want to go up and talk to them. Right? Just like there are certain people in your life who you want to have a better connection with, you're intentional with it and you're boundaried with it.
Yep.
It's the same, you know, it's the same thing with the spirit world. So I think, but so many people are disconnected from even communicating with the spirit world. They just think that it's going to be a can of worms, and it can be, but it's no different speaking to spirits than it is speaking to somebody's physical body, you just have to use different, listening skills.
Right. You're like, what's the listening skills? Yes. Yeah. Just like how we learn to be present with one another right now, or like we learn to like listen to one another. I think it's just going to be another like form of communication and listening. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do actually think that that's like, a lot of people talk about how humans are moving into like a new age, a new dawn, a new earth, all this stuff.
New earth.
Yeah, 3D into 5D and all this stuff. But when I really come down to thinking about like foundational, like what it is and what is happening to me, and this is obviously because I'm biased, but it's like, as a whole human, I have my physical senses, but I all have my intuitive senses. And everybody does. And if every human was using, like I think like in 100 years, everyone will be using like telepathy and clairvoyance, and like it would just be normal. Like children are born with it.
Right.
You don't need to teach it to children. They're practicing it. They're doing it. And what ends up happening is they get shamed, or they get told that it's fake, or they get,
like
told not
weird.
stop being weird. And then they cut it off, and then it becomes shameful and afraid. But the truth is that I think, we've, through Western colonization, again, this like heavy emphasis on materialism, but really humans are not like it, that's killing us. And it's making us be disconnected. It's making us feel inhuman.
Yeah.
And, I've lost more friends and community members to suicide than I have to any other form of death. And to me, that it really comes from this crisis of us thinking that what is in the material world is all that there is.
So true.
But like, none of our ancestors believed that, really. Like, this is actually a phenomena of
modern
Western
world.
Colonization and imperialism.
Yeah.
Also, if you look at it like, okay, this culture of Western colonization and imperialism, but we look at all different human cultures, like all of them talk to their ancestors, all of them communicate with spirits, all of them have spiritual practices and religions and traditions. It's really just this culture, which happens to be the predominant culture, that doesn't, which is actually more strange.
Yeah.
But the stigma is so real. And also for, especially like Asian communities that want to, a lot of us stripped these things willingly in order to assimilate. And
Seriously.
the trauma of assimilation in order to survive, in order to feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And I think that causes a lot of Asian diaspora to also turn away from the things that they know to be true about their heritage and their ancestors for the trauma of assimilation.
Exactly. I mean, it happened to me. I think it happens to so many people in the diaspora, right? Like wanting to be like, oh, and our parents and everyone else reaffirming that all the time, being like, yeah, just like learn English, speak English, proper English really well, because that's the language that everybody speaks here. It's a global language, right? And so it's just constantly always like beat into you, right? And so,
I think that's also the foundation for Han, is like the trauma of needing to assimilate without ever actually addressing the harm that was done.
Oh.
And that we still carry in our body as a result.
You said Han?
Yeah, Han.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. and then there's that, and then maybe is grief also tied in with that too?
Yes. Yeah, because the Korean Peninsula has always been invaders coming in and taking over. And
we just never left alone.
Yeah, and the ones who survived were the ones who fell in line.
Yeah.
And
or
so
who gave in, or were like sellouts or whatever. Yeah.
A consistent trauma of forced assimilation in order for survival, and like not ever getting the justice, not ever being able to address like what happened and what. Yeah. And I think that that's part of what we then have to work through, or like what we also have a gift to work through that trauma, and like what it can provide for us and how we can set it straight. But I do think that some of that work is in the diaspora, because sometimes you can't do that work there.
Oh, like in Korea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Oh my God. Another moment where it's like, oh my God, what the heck?
Yeah.
When you said that, like, now I'm like kind of struggling to make sense of it. But like when you said it, it was like, oh, oh. Do you feel like it would be helpful if Korean people in Korea who are like wanting to learn English, let's say, like, do you feel like those people in Korea, it would benefit them to hear what you're saying, your messages? Like, do you think it would benefit them? I certainly do, but what's your opinion
I
on
don't
that?
know.
Yeah.
I think that like foundationally, I haven't been to Korea since I was a little kid. I'm going to say that. I feel really connected in my heart to what is now called like Korean folklore.
Oh.
You know, like the traditions of Korea before it was imperialized by America. And from what I see and understand in Korea, and what causes me tremendous grief, is this trauma of forced assimilation of American values that I think sometimes I wonder how difficult it is for me to communicate across the cultural divide. And like, so for example, like the thing of plastic surgery. I feel so many feelings about all of the Koreans who feel the need to get plastic surgery to look a certain way that's not natural to them.
Like Western.
Because of American imperialism.
Yeah.
The obsession with plastic surgery.
Tall nose bridge.
Is
Yeah.
because of American imperialism.
Yep.
The obsession with K-pop and like celebrity culture. Also American imperialism.
Yeah.
And I just recognize that when I was personally so indoctrinated in American imperialism when I was a teenager, how there are things that just like didn't even make sense to me. Like, why would I want to talk to spirits? Why would I want to learn about a traditional Korean shaman? Like, those things were less than. And I think that that's like an unfortunate symptom of this trauma of forced assimilation, is to discredit your own heritage, discredit, because you have to in order to look at something else, to idealize something else that's not natural to you, that wasn't part of your culture. And I'm also going to say this is also true about Korean Christianity. Korean Christianity came out of American imperialism also.
Oh yeah, there were a ton of missionaries in Korea.
Yes.
My grandparents became Christian, and I was like, what are you?
Yes. Korean Christianity is because of American imperialism.
Yeah.
This is a like recent, unnatural, disconnected, and the quickness in which Koreans adopt to these quite harmful structures and push aside the past is, I think, it's so much of the trauma of being Korean, right? Because that's like a survival thing.
Yeah.
But it's also... I do hope and pray that there is an awakening of a younger group of people to realize that what they are taught about beauty standards, about K-pop, about all these things is like, it's not helpful. It's not healthy. It doesn't honor them at all. It's an erasure of who they are into something that's superficial, that's harmful, actually, and can only cause self-hate because it's not an acquirable ideal. It never was. It's completely artificial.
Yeah.
And but the need to fall in line with it is so strong, so you can survive, so that you can have a place. And so I think it's I imagine that it would be very hard for Koreans to be confronted with, I would say, the grief and the trauma of turning away from your own heritage in order to survive. And I imagine that trauma may prevent many from even wanting to connect with an understanding of the richness of the heritage from the peninsula.
And I mean, seriously, that reminds me of what somebody said recently, was like, when we were talking about doing a group ceremony, like a group medicine ceremony and within a Korean identifying container, someone had said, that sounds really triggering. And I was like, at first I was a little like, oh, what? And then I'm like, oh, I can see, because of everything that you're mentioning, right? Because of the grief and the trauma that Koreans hold, right? And then to all get together and journey together, and then all the shit might come up, and then you're just like, what now, guys? You know?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, are we just gonna like end up feeling really bad for ourselves? And then, you know, and then probably what's gonna end up happening is someone's gonna get re-triggered or something, right? Because it's like we're just seeing reflections of our grief, of our pain, of our trauma.
And it's deep. Before American imperialism, it was Japanese occupation. Before Japanese occupation, it was Chinese Confucianism.
Yeah.
So really, like, there are so many layers. Like, and I've seen that. I've had ancestors come through that were oppressed by the Chinese, actually. And they had a lot to say too. You know?
Wow.
So yeah, and I've actually also had ancestor ceremonies where people came through who are not Korean, whose Korean ancestors came in though.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that was also really interesting.
Wow.
I think that there's an interesting opportunity for the Korean diaspora. Yeah, that's not available in Korea, that for us to do the healing work together, because I see both the trauma that we carry, but I also see the opportunity for us is ripe. And I think that the healing on the others, there is healing on the other side. And also I want to say, Western medicine doesn't have anything to say about healing. Western medicine has nothing to say about healing. Its focus is on substances and symptoms.
That's right. Yeah, pretty much.
Right. But what does it mean to be healed? There's nothing for Western medicine to say about that topic. So I've had to look to the East for, like, what does Eastern medicine tradition say about what does it mean to be healed? And especially within my psychic tradition. And what I have learned is that to be healed means that I can be present in my body and I can be in choice regarding how I am responding to what is happening in front of me, that I can see what's happening in present time, not a story projected on it. And I can react and respond from how and where I want to be, than an immediate response in a certain way, which comes from our trauma. Right. And when that happens, that is a really beautiful, potent place to be. And that is also only when our authentic expression of who we are can come out. And I think that's what ultimately people yearn for, is to be able to authentically express without fear, without doubt, and to be witnessed by others who are also authentic and supportive. And supportive, I think, is the biggest thing, right? Because there's also that whole, like, what they call tall poppy, like, oh, if somebody has something nice or does something nice or is happy, we need to, like, you know, chop off their head. Like, because it's a thing. It's a thing. Misery loves company. Like, so that's the thing. Oftentimes when somebody gets triggered, it triggers somebody else, and it kind of like snowballs into this thing. But I also think that's also why it's so important that the person who's holding the space has done their own work. And I think in the psychedelic renaissance, something that I don't see enough of is people who have teachers and who follow lineages that have teachers and teachers that they stick with and that they stay with for a long period of time. Because I really only seen... And this is true about Buddhism too. Like, there's pan-Buddhism and there's teachers of different kind, but the real Buddhist lineages that come from the Vedic traditions, which is all in India, they have an understanding that a teacher carries the vibration of the energy and they transmit that energy through their student, and the student takes it in more and more over time. And then that student becomes a teacher and they transmit the energy. It's all happening energetically. And this is actually why when you go and you see all the deities from India, they have their hands up.
Yeah.
So they have their hands. So they're transmitting the vibration that they're carrying from their hand to you.
Oh.
And that's how true spiritual knowledge, understanding, and lineage gets transmitted. And so I think that it's really important. So I have my teacher, Laura, who I am deeply committed to. I have many teachers, but I have one that I, go to, and to keep me honest, because I have my own issues that come up. I need my own way of not projecting my problems onto people who are coming to me for help. And I won't know how to do that unless I have a teacher. And so I think it's very important for us. And there is ways, my teacher doesn't teach about entheogens, but she teaches about how to be managed in your own energy.
Yes.
And I think that that's really important for people who want to do this work and who are holding space for others to do this work to also be able to do.
I agree.
And it's not something that is also understood, honored, anchored in Western medicine traditions. Like you do have teachers and stuff, and they do think, self-containment, mentors, but they don't have someone who's really there to make sure through thick and thin, like an apprenticeship, that
like being adopted into their family, essentially.
Yeah. And also it is really hard work to hold space for others, because they're also projecting stuff onto you. And how do you make sure that you're not getting tangled into it yourself? How do you make sure you're handling it in a good way? There's a really great book, Ethics of Caring. Yeah. And she talks about this, how we need peers and teachers as people who are holding space for others. And if we really want to bring healing into our community, we need to be dedicated to that ourselves individually before we would ever take on the care for others. Yeah. And I think that is really missing from a lot of these frameworks and understandings. Yeah. And I think it's also a necessary component for us to be the change we want to experience, so that we can actually create healing environments, which is based on our connection with ourselves, each other, and source, and not just the substances that make us feel happy for short periods of time.
Yeah. And they are short periods of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? That peak state, right? And then it's like, okay, what's after that? Like you hear about people who sit with Mother Aya 50 times, 100 times. I'm like, but everyone says you're the same person.
Yeah.
So what gives, right? So I think that's where it's like, oh, are you actually I think that speaks to what you were saying about being witnessed and holding space for others, being supported and being supportive, being in a container, a safe container, a community, right?
Yes, that's the other thing, being a community. So I had the experience. I went down, I was called, and I went down to Peru, and I sat for 2 weeks with ayahuasca. And it was a really profound, just beyond profound experience. And I did a dieta, and I dieted tobacco, and I did a 7-day fast with her. I went really deep, really strong, and I gained tremendous clarity. I saw so many visions of so many things. I went through death and rebirth, and it was so powerful. And then I flew back to the United States, and all of a sudden, Monday morning, I'm at my job in Salesforce.
Oh.
And I was what? And so now for this, my biggest recommendation for people who want to do this work is to do it in community, find a community. Because the other thing is I came back, and I see this with my psychic work too. What happens is you go off, you have this peak experience, and suddenly you're opened up to all this possibility and this change. But then you go back to your environment, and your environment treats you how you were. And you can either then fall back to how you were, or you have to train everybody around you to treat you differently now, which is way more work than a peak experience, actually. And I think that's what happens. It's actually interesting in psychic school, as people are going through it, what often happens, because you start to shift your energetic patterns. And now you can't relate to somebody the same way you used to relate to them, because you don't act that way anymore. Yeah. And that creates a lot of friction and tension. And I actually see a lot of people who don't heal, who won't let go of attachments that cause them harm, because at an unconscious level, they recognize that it will force them to change all the relationships in their life. And they're not ready or willing to do that yet.
Right.
And so a big part of doing ceremony work and doing these uncoverings and doing these opening up of all these possibilities and going into that space is that we also need to be in community in a way where other people are doing the work. And I'm available to see you differently now. You're available to see me differently now.
Oh,
and that does not exist in our normal day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it's really important for us to do this work. And a big reason also why I do groups, and I try to do groups with people, it's the same people coming back. Oftentimes people who want to do ayahuasca, I'll actually recommend local groups first. So that you can, I'm very lucky here in the Bay Area, in some areas, because you then, now you get an opportunity to journey into this space with other people. You come back a different person. They come back a different person. Now you go out into your life. Everybody else wants to treat you the same, but then you can go to coffee. You can call this other person who shares the same culture with you, who shares the same community with you. And you can check in with them. Hey, I'm going through this thing right now. It feels really crazy. And it does, because the world is treating you how you used to be, not how you think you are now. And you have to sort through that.
Right.
And it's important for us to have support through that. Otherwise, people will just go back to how they were. Because the inertia is too strong.
Yeah.
They have already created that. Just a wild, offshoot to outer space and back is not going to change your life.
Right.
You have to change the relationships in your life. You have to change the way that you connect with people in your life. You have to change the things you care about.
Wow.
The things you pay attention to. And that will shift everything in your life.
Wow.
And sometimes people are willing and ready to do that, and some people aren't. But also the people that aren't, I also tell them, then it could be even more painful for you to go and have this huge heart-opening experience and then come back, and now you're in the same sad life you were in before, and you don't have the tools or the community or the support to modify your day-to-day life. And I actually, in Eastern tradition, what you do their spiritual practices are based on the day. What you do every day is how you change your life. You meditate every day. It's not like you pray every day. You pray over your meal. In Indian tradition, you celebrate when the sun comes up and you celebrate when the sun goes down.
Yeah.
And that's how we are anchored in that, and every day I grow, every day I shift.
Yeah.
Every day I apply these methods that help me connect with source. And when you do that, that's when you have the trajectory, because it's like you change a little bit every day.
Yeah.
But the trajectory of where you change is dramatic versus somebody who's living your life and then they go and they have a ceremony that is wild experience, they come back, but then they don't do anything else. You're not actually going to change. It's not actually really going to be that helpful for you.
Right.
You actually need something in your life that helps you take your understanding and integrate it into an embodied living.
Right.
And I don't know practices outside of Eastern and Indigenous traditions that offer that.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't think of any.
Because they're anchored in community. They're anchored in living together and growing together.
Yeah.
Which is what we actually need, not just substances that make us feel good every once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think this is everything that you're speaking to is just really speaking to something I've really been feeling too. And I think that's why more and more I'm like, community is medicine. Community is medicine. Community is the medicine. So the other day I was in a rapé, cacao and mushroom ceremony. And at the end of it, I was in communication with someone and I was telling her, I feel like if I didn't intake any substances and I was just here with the community dancing and, singing together, I would be just as happy and healed and whole.
Yeah. Okay. So in all of our indigenous traditions in the East, that's what people did.
Yeah.
People got together
and
they sang and they danced and they ate good food.
Yeah.
And I know this is true about indigenous traditions in the South. And I also know this is true about indigenous traditions in the East, although there's the difference is that, so I did learn from a shaman in Peru that, you know, in the village structure, in the societal group, there is a shaman, you know, a medicine person. And the medicine person creates the gathering. They bring everyone together, you know, they make sure they have all the food and all the drinks and music and dancing. And they set the vibration for the gathering. And they're usually the ones who are starting the drum patterns. They're usually the ones that are, you know, busting out the drinks. And then they also, and historically, are ones who would take mind-altering substances.
Oh, that's right.
And in their mind-altering substances, they would create dances and create music and set the energy for them. Other people did not consume the mind-altering substance. Not ones who were trained, ones who were not trained. It is in recent history that the shamans in Latin America have allowed people who were sitting in the ceremony, not just the shamans, to consume the mind-altering substances.
Wow.
When you study the traditions, indigenous traditions of the East, that is also true. It is the group medicine healer, brings people together. It's true about the Mudas. They bring people together.
They're the ones that's
music,
like dancing.
They're the ones that bring in the food, make sure it's a good space. They're the ones who starting it. And if there were mushrooms or other mind-altering substances that was taken, they were the only ones who took them.
Right. That's so amazing.
And but in their taking of it, they are also the ones that are creating the container and setting the energy for the container. And now with this psychedelic renaissance, the casual people in the community are taking the substances, but they don't have the proper training or oversight because it's been co-opted into this medicine system that centers the substance rather than the communities and the purpose of the communities gathering and using of those substances.
Exactly. Yeah. Like the focus has just been like completely knocked off its center. You know?
Yes, because of hyper individualization.
Yeah. And focusing on something like a medicine or like the substance, right? And instead of like the community,
the reactions of the body to the substance, rather than why are we? What is it that we're actually trying to do? Which is feel a sense of love and connection with an understanding of who we are and why we're here. Which, so this is like, you know, I think part of it. And I think it does also have to do with like, you know, humanity waking up and becoming also aware that this view of life as just a materialistic thing is so harmful and not true. And that so many people won't feel, you know, that loneliness and all these things can only truly be healed by allowing oneself to connect to that which is beyond yourself. But, you know, the traumas of organized religion is also very real and true. And so there's work that people often need to do to move through that in order to begin to connect again.
Yeah. And I think that's why, like, I think this is so important too, is for people to see examples of this. Right? Just like how I'm getting to see examples of this. I think the part of it is like, I feel like I'm getting like access to these like incredible healers and wisdom keepers, right? But then I'm like, oh, but this is the medicine, right? Like everything that you're speaking to right now is the medicine. And I'm like, why aren't people getting access to this medicine? And so it feels like I need to like disperse this medicine rather than like giving people mushrooms. I'm like, listen to this, like, you know, like come here, like sit with this, like, you know, because this is the medicine. This is the stuff that will change your core, right? And